My name is Ryan Cole. I'm 24 years old, and for most of my life I believe that nothing truly dramatic ever happened in towns like Briarwood, Pennsylvania. Places like this don't explode, they rot quietly. I learned that too late. 3 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. Not perfect, but stable, predictable. I worked as an assistant manager at a local outdoor supply store, rented a modest one-bedroom apartment above a closed-down bakery, and dated Madison Reed for almost 3 years. We met right after high school, grew into adulthood side by side, or at least that's what I thought was happening. Madison had this way of making chaos feel harmless. She laughed easily, spoke quickly, and always had a reason for everything. If she was late, there was traffic. If she didn't answer her phone, it was on silent. If she seemed distant, she was just tired. And I believed her, because trust, when it's been around long enough, stops asking questions. The day everything changed wasn't cinematic. No rain, no shouting, just a quiet Tuesday that started like any other. Madison said she'd be working late. She stood by the door, already halfway outside, scrolling on her phone. She kissed me on the cheek, quick, distracted, and said, "Don't wait up." Then she left. She forgot her phone on the kitchen counter. I noticed it immediately, not because I was suspicious, but because it never left her hand. Ever. Madison treated her phone like an extension of her nervous system. Seeing it lying there felt wrong, like finding someone's wallet abandoned in the middle of the street. I didn't touch it at first. I made dinner. I ate alone. I told myself it was nothing. Then it buzzed. Once. Twice. By the third notification, my chest felt tight in a way I didn't recognize. I glanced at the screen without picking it up. A name popped up I didn't know. Can't stop thinking about last night. I stood there longer than I should have. Long enough to still claim innocence later. Then I picked it up. I won't describe everything I saw. Not because it was graphic, but because it was precise. Intimate. Familiar in the worst possible way. Messages that referenced places I recognized. Jokes I'd heard before. Compliments that used phrases Madison once told me were our thing. The guy's name was Tyler. He lived in Briarwood. He worked near downtown. That was all it took. In a town this small, that narrowed it down to maybe 6 people. I sat at the table for almost an hour, phone in my hand, staring at a version of my relationship I had never been invited into. When Madison finally came home, she smiled like nothing was wrong. I didn't confront her that night. I don't know why. Fear, maybe. Or denial. Or the strange instinct to wait and see just how deep the lie went. That decision, to wait, changed everything. Because in the weeks that followed, I didn't just lose Madison. I found out who she really was. And in the process, I met someone else entirely. Her name was Claire Donovan, and she didn't believe in coincidences. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life without meaning to. On the surface, everything stayed the same. Madison still slept in my bed, still complained about her coworkers, still asked me what I wanted for dinner like she hadn't already eaten with someone else. I played my role too, nodding, smiling, pretending I wasn't cataloging every inconsistency like evidence in a trial I hadn't decided to start yet. But underneath, something had shifted. Trust hadn't shattered in one loud moment. It had thinned, like ice you keep stepping on, knowing eventually it won't hold. I didn't check her phone again. I didn't need to. Once you see the pattern, you start noticing it everywhere. The way she angled her screen away from me. The sudden password change. The new perfume she claimed was a free sample from a magazine we didn't subscribe to. I started staying later at work. At first, to avoid her. Then, because that's where I met Claire Donovan. She came into the store on a Thursday evening, 5 minutes before closing. That alone made her memorable. People in Briarwood rushed. They didn't linger. Claire did. She was tall, confident without being loud, dressed in a way that suggested she didn't care much about fitting in and didn't need to. Mid-30s, if I had to guess. Dark hair pulled back loosely. Sharp eyes that missed nothing. She asked about hiking boots. Not the cheap kind. Not the kind people bought for fashion. She wanted durability, ankle support, terrain ratings. Questions no one under 30 ever asked unless they were trying to impress someone. I helped her. Or tried to. She listened in a way that felt unsettling. Like she was actually processing what I said instead of waiting for her turn to speak. When I handed her a pair to try on, she glanced at my name tag. "Ryan," she said. "You look tired." It wasn't flirtatious. It was observational. And somehow that made it worse. "Long week," I said. She smiled faintly. Those are usually long lives compressed into 7 days. I don't know why that stuck with me. She bought the boots. Then, as I was ringing her up, she asked, "You always close?" "Most nights," I said. "Good to know," she replied and left. I told myself it meant nothing. The next week, she came back. Then again, always close to closing time. Always for something specific, gear, supplies, questions about trails outside town. We talked. Not about anything personal at first, just practical things. Then one night, she asked, "Are you happy?" It was too direct, too sudden. I laughed it off. "Most days," I said. She studied me for a second longer than necessary. That wasn't an answer. "No one's ever happy all the time," I replied. "True," she said. "But they usually know when they're lying to themselves." I didn't ask her name until the 4th visit. She gave it without hesitation. Claire Donovan. She lived alone. Had moved to Briarwood a year ago. Worked remotely. That was all she offered. And I didn't push. The night everything tipped was the night Madison didn't come home at all. No text. No call. Just silence. I sat in the dark apartment until after midnight, phone in my hand, watching the hours stack up. At 1:17 a.m., Madison finally texted, "Stayed at a friend's. Long story. Talk tomorrow." I didn't respond. The next evening at work, Claire came in like always. I don't know what she saw on my face, but she didn't bother with small talk. "Something broke," she said. "Yes," I answered before thinking. She nodded once. "Good. That means it can't pretend anymore." That was the first time I realized Claire wasn't just passing through my life. She was paying attention. And Madison, whether she knew it yet or not, was already losing control of the story she thought she was writing. Madison came home the next morning like nothing had happened. She moved quietly, like a guest in her own guilt. I pretended to be asleep while she showered, dressed, and slipped into the kitchen. I heard her open cabinets, pour cereal, hum softly. That hum used to calm me. Now it sounded rehearsed. When I finally walked in, she smiled too quickly. "Hey," she said. "Rough night." I nodded. "Didn't sleep much." "Yeah," she replied, eyes fixed on her bowl. "Same." There it was. The lie, placed gently between us like a fragile object neither of us wanted to touch. She launched into an explanation I hadn't asked for. A friend from work. Too much wine. Couch too small. Phone died. She spoke fast, like speed might turn fiction into fact. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. That scared her more than yelling would have. "Ryan," she said finally, "you're being weird." "I'm just tired," I answered. She relaxed instantly. That told me everything I needed to know. Madison wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of being inconvenienced. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from the last year. The new job she'd been vague about. The sudden interest in clothes she never wore for me. The way she'd started treating my patients like a renewable resource. By morning, something in me had settled. Not anger. Clarity. At work, Claire noticed immediately. "You decided something," she said while testing a flashlight display. "I think so," I replied. She nodded. Decisions change posture. We didn't talk more than that. But when she left, she paused at the door. "Coffee," she said. "Tomorrow. After your shift." It wasn't a question. The cafe she chose was on the edge of town, half forgotten, the kind of place locals only went when they didn't want to be seen. Claire ordered black coffee. I ordered whatever came with the biggest mug. She let me talk first. I told her everything. Not in detail, just enough. The cheating, the waiting, the feeling of being slowly erased from my own relationship. I expected sympathy or advice. She gave me neither. "Do you still want her?" Claire asked. The question caught me off guard. "I don't know," I admitted. She leaned back. "Then you already have your answer. What you're feeling isn't love. It's habit mixed with wounded pride." That stung, because it was accurate. "What would you do?" I asked. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'd stop reacting. People like Madison thrive on reaction. Attention, drama, control." I frowned. "So I just walk away?" "Eventually," Claire said. "But not before you understand the full picture." I looked at her. "You sound like you've done this before." "I have," she replied calmly. "From every angle." That was the first time I felt the shift. The moment where our conversation crossed from coincidence into something intentional. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I talked often. Sometimes at the cafe. Sometimes in the store after closing. She never rushed anything. Never pushed. She asked questions that forced me to think instead of feel. Meanwhile, Madison grew restless. She started accusing me of being distant, of not caring, of changing. The irony almost made me laugh. One night, she confronted me outright. "Are you cheating on me?" she demanded. The audacity was almost impressive. "No," I said truthfully. She searched my face, looking for guilt she couldn't find. That scared her. That same night, she left again. This time, I didn't ask where she was going. I texted Claire instead. "You were right," I wrote. "She needs reaction." Claire replied seconds later. "And you're done giving it." I didn't realize it then, but that was the night the balance shifted. Madison thought she was still playing me. Claire knew she wasn't. And somewhere between the two of them, I was becoming someone else entirely. Madison didn't come home for 3 nights. The first night, I waited. The second, I cleaned. By the third, I rearranged the apartment like someone preparing for a move they hadn't admitted to yet. I boxed old clothes, threw out expired food, erased her name from the whiteboard calendar she never used anyway. When she finally returned, she looked surprised to see me calm. "Where have you been?" she asked, defensive before I'd said a word. "Out," I replied. She scoffed. "That's it." "Yes." That was the moment she realized something was wrong. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't. She tried a new tactic. Tears. Apologies without specifics. She said she felt lost, confused, pressured. She blamed stress, her job, the town, even me, gently, like it was for my own good. "I just need reassurance," she said. "I need to know you still care." I looked at her and felt nothing. Not hatred, not love, just distance. "I care about honesty," I said. "And I don't think you're capable of that right now." She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. That night, I slept on the couch. The next morning, she left early. By evening, she was back to pretending nothing had happened. "Claire said this would happen." "You're destabilizing her," Claire told me over coffee. People who cheat rewrite reality to stay comfortable. When you stop participating, the story collapses. I asked her why she cared so much. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she said, "Do you know why older women are dangerous to liars?" I raised an eyebrow. "We've already been lied to," she continued. "We've already survived it. That makes us patient." Over time, Claire started showing me patterns. Not just Madison's, but my own. How I avoided conflict. How I filled silence with understanding. How I mistook endurance for loyalty. Our conversations grew longer, deeper, sometimes uncomfortable. One night, after closing the store, Claire stayed. The lights were dim. The town outside was quiet. "You're not angry enough," she said. "I don't want to be," I replied. "That's not what I mean," she said. "You're not angry for yourself. You're still thinking about fairness." I frowned. "Is that bad?" "It's dangerous," she answered. "Fair people get used." She didn't touch me, didn't lean in, didn't flirt. She didn't need to. The attraction was in the way she saw me. Fully, clearly, without distortion. Madison, on the other hand, escalated. She started posting photos online. Cryptic captions. New faces cropped just out of frame. She wanted a response. From me. From the town. I gave her none. That's when she started lying about me. A coworker pulled me aside one day. "Hey man, is everything okay at home?" I knew then. Madison wasn't just losing control. She was trying to regain it by rewriting me as the villain. Claire wasn't surprised. "She's setting the stage," she said. "Which means she thinks you're still the audience." "What do I do?" I asked. Claire's eyes hardened slightly. "You let her think that." That was the first time revenge entered the conversation. Not as rage, but as strategy. "Nothing illegal," Claire continued. "Nothing cruel. Just truth, placed carefully." She explained how people like Madison built their image on selective honesty. How pulling one thread, at the right moment, could unravel everything. "You don't expose her," Claire said. "You let her expose herself." I felt a chill. Not fear. Anticipation. "And if she gets hurt?" I asked. Claire met my eyes. "She already hurt herself. You're just stepping out of the way." That night, Madison came home late again. She smiled like she'd won something. I smiled back. She didn't know it yet, but she was walking exactly where Claire wanted her to. And for the first time since the betrayal, I felt something close to control. By the next week, Madison had fully stepped into the trap without realizing it. It wasn't obvious at first. She posted vague stories, subtle digs, little comments on social media that hinted she thought she was still in control. Everyone in Briarwood noticed. but no one knew the real story. That was the advantage. In a town this small, perception is everything. Claire and I started working in tandem, though we never called it that. It wasn't coordination at first. It was observation. Quiet, intentional observation. She would point things out, how Madison timed her posts, what phrases she used, what faces appeared in her photos, how she shared innocent texts with coworkers, knowing people would screenshot them. Little details I'd never noticed without her. But I started noticing. We met at the cafe almost daily. Sometimes I arrived early, sometimes she did. Sometimes we didn't talk about Madison at all. But those moments, the casual coffees and the half-smiles, felt like strategy sessions. Not plotting revenge, not exactly, but preparing for reality. And reality had Madison losing. I started seeing her differently. Claire, that is. Not as a teacher or a guide, but as someone whose patience and experience were magnetic. She didn't rush intimacy. She didn't flirt overtly. But when she listened, really listened, I felt seen in a way I hadn't since the betrayal. It was a quiet heat, a tension that didn't need words. And it scared me, in the best possible way. Meanwhile, Madison's efforts grew desperate. She confronted me one night in the apartment. "I know you're talking to someone," she said, voice sharp, eyes narrowing. I shrugged. "Maybe I am." "You're lying," she hissed. "Or maybe I'm not," I said. "Does it matter?" Her lip trembled. For the first time, I saw fear there. Not rage. Not hurt. Fear. The small realization that the narrative she'd been controlling was slipping through her fingers. "You can't just," she started. "I can," I interrupted calmly. "Because I don't need you to believe in me anymore." She left abruptly, slamming the door. I didn't follow. I didn't care. Later, Claire came over to check in. She didn't judge. She just listened when I explained everything. "She's unraveling," she said. "And you're still standing." I realized I was. More than that, I felt steady. In control. I wasn't plotting petty revenge or public humiliation. I was just being honest with myself. That honesty, Claire said, was all the strategy one needed. We started seeing each other outside the store and cafe too, under the guise of casual walks, errands, short trips to the edge of town. Every interaction was purposeful, yet casual. Dangerous in a subtle way. Madison noticed, of course. Her posts became more erratic, more performative. People started whispering. Not too loud, not yet. But the tide was turning. And with every passing day, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't want Madison back. I wanted to see her exposed, not out of cruelty, but for the truth to finally be visible. She had built her life on half-lies, on control, on the assumption that everyone else would dance to her tune. I wanted her to see that dance was over. One evening, Claire and I walked past Madison's apartment. She was on the balcony, scrolling her phone, oblivious. The moment was quiet, ordinary, and yet it felt like victory. Not mine, not hers, but ours. The way reality sometimes shifts quietly, almost imperceptibly, until the ground feels different under your feet. Claire looked at me and said nothing. That glance, calm, knowing, was enough. And I realized, for the first time since the betrayal, that life could be something new, something beyond resentment, something powerful in its simplicity. We had chosen not to react impulsively, not to yell, not to confront, not to humiliate. We had chosen observation, patience, and timing. And that choice, I knew, would define the next phase. Madison was still a part of the town, still in my life, but she was no longer in control. And with Claire beside me, I had a feeling that, finally, I wasn't either, at least, not in the way she thought I was. The storm was coming, and for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid to watch it unfold. The following days felt like a careful game of chess. Madison was moving her pieces without realizing the board had changed, and I was learning how to anticipate her next moves. Claire didn't tell me what to do. She guided me, taught me to see patterns in chaos. And for the first time since the betrayal, I felt a kind of clarity I hadn't known existed. Madison tried subtle attacks. She commented on my social media posts, tagged people I didn't know in pictures with captions that screamed drama, and even showed up unexpectedly at the cafe. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me flustered, apologetic, or at least visibly rattled. But I stayed calm, neutral. She was learning that my silence was more dangerous than any argument. One evening, Madison cornered me outside my apartment. The air was cold, crisp. Leaves crackled underfoot. She looked tired, worn, desperate. Ryan, she began. I know, I said quietly. Her brow furrowed. Know what? I know everything, I replied. I know who you're seeing, who you've been talking to, what you've been posting online. I know you're trying to control the story. She blinked. You can't. I already am, I said. The pause was long, too long for comfort. Then she turned abruptly, storming into her building without another word. That was the first time she truly realized she was no longer in charge. That night, Claire called. She didn't need words. One sentence was enough. Did you see her reaction? She asked. Yes, I replied, voice flat but steady. That's progress, she said. Now we begin phase 2. Phase 2. The words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't ask what it meant. I trusted her. That trust had become addictive. Her confidence was magnetic, but more than that, she had a way of making me see the truth in my own actions. Not to manipulate, not to seduce, but to reveal, to prepare. We met at the cafe the next morning. Claire had a notebook this time, small and leather-bound. She scribbled notes while I talked about Madison, about the patterns I'd noticed, about the ways her lies were intertwined with self-delusion. Then she looked up. She thinks she owns you, Claire said, but she never really did. You allowed her to define your boundaries for too long. Now you get to define them yourself. Her words felt like armor. I repeated them in my head as I walked home, feeling lighter, more focused. Madison's games were predictable now, like a story whose ending I had read but whose details I could manipulate. And with Claire guiding me, I knew exactly how to proceed. Over the next week, I began documenting. Not for anyone else, just for me. Every lie, every half-truth, every manipulation Madison used. Screenshots, timestamps, notes in my phone. Patterns became obvious. Themes emerged. Her control depended entirely on me reacting, on showing distress, on being engaged. Remove the audience, remove the illusion. Claire observed quietly during this process, sometimes commenting in passing, sometimes just watching me work. The tension between us was subtle but undeniable. Not overt, not reckless. Just the quiet awareness that something was shifting, something deeper than the betrayal and the anger. It was a connection born of shared understanding, a partnership in strategy and patience. Then Madison crossed a line. She tried to confront me at work, in front of co-workers. Her accusations were clumsy, transparent. She tried to shame me, but I remained calm, neutral. Watching her unravel was a strange mixture of satisfaction and relief. It was finally happening. The story was shifting. After the confrontation, Claire and I sat in her car outside the store. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said, simply, "She's fast, but she's predictable. And now we're faster." I realized that wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt like I was moving forward. Actually moving forward, not just reacting to Madison's chaos. The next steps would be deliberate, careful, and for the first time, truly mine. Phase 3 began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Madison's unraveling had reached the point where she was desperate to reclaim attention, to regain some semblance of control. But by now, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't engaging. And that was the difference. Every attempt she made to manipulate or provoke me only exposed her further. Claire and I met at the cafe, as usual, discussing the next steps, not in anger, not in malice, but in calculation. She never framed it as revenge. It was strategy, observation, and timing. "Do you see it?" she asked, tapping her fingers on the table. "Every lie she's told, every claim of innocence, is now public. The cracks are visible. People are starting to question her." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and relief. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I was simply stepping aside and letting her narrative collapse under its own weight. That night, Madison tried one last gambit. She showed up at my apartment, dressed carefully, voice trembling as she attempted charm, apology, and intimidation all at once. "Ryan, she started. "Madison," I interrupted, calm, collected. "I'm not going to play that game anymore." She blinked, incredulous. Her eyes darted around the apartment, searching for the familiar reactions she had relied on for years. The anger, the pleading, the confusion. She found nothing. Claire's lessons rang in my mind. Let her reveal herself. And she did. Madison began talking faster, trying to explain, justify, plead. Every word contradicted the last. Every claim chipped away at her carefully constructed image. I listened, silent, observing. She was unraveling before me, not because I forced her, but because she could no longer maintain control. After she left, I texted Claire. "It's done." Her reply was simple. "Almost. We finish tomorrow." The next day, we orchestrated a final, subtle exposure. Nothing cruel, nothing illegal, just the truth placed carefully, naturally, so that Madison couldn't spin it. Screenshots, contradictions, posts that revealed the gaps in her story. All of it surfaced quietly online and within the social circles of Briarwood. By evening, the town had taken notice. People who had once sympathized with Madison now questioned her credibility. Friends whispered, co-workers raised eyebrows. Tyler seemed confused. Madison, for the first time, had no audience. Her influence, carefully built on manipulation, vanished almost overnight. I watched it happen with a mix of astonishment and calm. It was strangely beautiful, not in a vindictive way, but in the way truth clears the air after a storm. Claire and I sat together on the bench near the park, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The streets were quiet, leaves scattered in the gentle wind. "She's exposed," I said quietly. Claire nodded. "And you didn't have to lift a finger." Patience is the most powerful weapon. We stayed there for a long time, neither speaking much. The tension between us, the attraction, the unspoken understanding, the slow-burn intimacy, was palpable. But it was restrained, controlled, deliberate. For the first time since Madison's betrayal, I felt fully in control of my own life. The fear, the anger, the confusion, they were gone. What remained was clarity, patience, and a connection with Claire that was built not on chaos, but on understanding, strategy, and shared perspective. Madison's downfall wasn't about punishment. It was about balance, about letting truth take its natural course. And Claire, she wasn't just part of this plan. She had become my anchor, my partner, my unexpected guide through the storm. As we walked back to our cars that evening, I realized something important. The story wasn't over, but for the first time in months, I wasn't a character in someone else's narrative. I was the author of my own, and Claire was right there with me. The final phase wasn't dramatic. There were no confrontations, no shouting matches, no dramatic public reveal. Just quiet consequences, subtle shifts, and the inevitability of truth catching up. Madison had spent years constructing a version of reality where she controlled perception. But perception, it turns out, is fragile when the foundation is deceit. By the end of that month, her friends no longer mirrored her narrative. Tyler stopped messaging her. People in town whispered in neutral tones, no longer indulging her attempts at drama. And Madison, for the first time, was left with herself. The lies, the half-truths, the manipulations. Alone, Claire and I watched from the distance of patience, not out of cruelty, but out of understanding. Revenge, in the traditional sense, wasn't the point. Observation and timing were. Letting her see the consequences of her own actions, that was enough. One evening, we walked along the small trails just outside Briarwood. The town lights glimmered faintly in the distance. The air was crisp and still. Claire looked at me, her gaze calm and unwavering. "You've changed," she said. I smiled faintly. "I think I'm finally learning who I am." She reached out, lightly brushing her hand against mine. The touch was electric, restrained, intentional. Not desperate, not chaotic, just precise. We walked in silence for a while, letting the quiet speak for us. I thought about Madison, about the betrayal, the lies, the games. And I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt closure. I had seen the truth. I had reclaimed control. And I had learned patience, strategy, and the value of measured action. Claire and I didn't rush anything. There was no need. Our connection was solid, grounded in shared understanding, trust, and subtle desire. The slow burn, the careful pacing, it made everything feel real, lasting. Something Madison could never offer. Back in town, life continued as it always had. Shops opened and closed. People went to work, small talk filled the streets. Madison remained part of the community, but her narrative no longer dominated. She had no audience. And in that absence, her power dissolved quietly. I realized something essential. Revenge isn't about punishment. It's about reclaiming your narrative, your life, and your peace. The storm doesn't need to roar to be effective. Sometimes, it whispers, and the quiet reveals more than any shout ever could. Claire stopped at the edge of a hill, looking out over the town. The sun had set, leaving a soft glow across the horizon. She turned to me. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. I knew what she meant. Not about Madison, not about revenge. About life. About clarity. About choosing who you allow into your story. I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Our fingers intertwined naturally, comfortably, like two people who had navigated chaos together and emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. "I think I like this beginning," I said quietly. "Good," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's ours." And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't in years. Betrayal is painful, but growth can be quiet. Connections can be slow-burning. Power can be subtle. And the life you rebuild from the pieces of what was broken can be stronger than anything you imagined. Madison's chapter had ended without fireworks. Claire and I didn't need them. The real story, the one worth telling, was what we were building, step by step, moment by moment, in the quiet spaces where truth, patience, and trust finally meet. I looked at her and realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by anyone else's actions. I wasn't a pawn. I wasn't a victim. I was Ryan Cole. And this was only the beginning of everything I could become. The small town slept below us, unaware of the quiet storm that had passed and the subtle revolution that had quietly reshaped our lives. And as Claire and I walked back down the trail, side by side, I felt the weight of betrayal lift completely. The night was ours. The future was ours. And nothing, not lies, not deceit, not betrayal, could take that away.